Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Rousseau's Political Economy. Today we are now looking at what I call the first section, number one, Art Thing 1, which again looks at from pages 214 and 217 of the on political economy, discourse on political economy in the Masters edition of the Social Contract volume, which has both not the Social Contract but also the Geneva manuscript plus this wonderful piece on this. So we'll look at part one. Okay, again, we're going to divide this up into 5 videos, focusing on the divisions that he himself has. The introduction, which was the first part, then part 1, then part 2, then part 3, and then the conclusion at that. So let's go looking at this. So first and most important maxim of legislative and popular government, that is, one that has the good of the people as its object, is therefore, as I have said, to follow the general will in all matters. Therefore, what is it? In other words, they follow the general will in all matters. What is the legitimate maximum of popular government? That is the good of the peoples as his object. The public good is his object, and that is what I've said, to follow the general will in all matters. But in order to follow it, it must be known. And above all, it must be well distinguished from the private will, starting with one's own, a distinction that is virtually always extremely difficult to make, and on which only the most sublime virtue can shed sufficient light. So there, what is this idea? What is the general will, which is, again, what is the will that is common to all, that is the public good, aiming at the public good and securing the public good, versus the private will. The private will is your own will, my own will. And how do I distinguish between my own will and the general will? It's because we often, the mistake is to assume that your will is their will. Rather, it should be understand what that is. You have to have a subtlety of a subtle virtue to shed light on the significant light, shed sufficient light on the difference. Since it is necessary to be free, it is necessary to be free in order to will. Another difficulty, which is hardly lesser. It is assured both public freedom and the government authority. It is to assure both public freedom and government. So therefore, to be able to will, you must be free. You cannot be subordinate, because by willing is that it's your will, not another. If you're not free, you're not engaging in. If you're not capable, if you're not free, and rather, but you are subordinate. You don't have a will of your own. You are being, your will is being shaped by another will. So therefore, the free will, this idea of the free will, he says here, is distinguished in that you are free, right? And since it's necessary to be free in order to will, that's a difficulty in itself, right? And it's hardly any less. It's not a lesser difficulty than the difficulty of knowing between your will and the general will. You have to be free in that sense. It is to assure both public freedom and government authority. In other words, your public freedom, in other words, everyone be free, but at the same time, government must have authority. The government acting, and how and why can it compel? That it has to be the government that compels, which is doing what? The government compelling is the general interest, the general will, in that sense. The general will, the need that the general will prevails. And the government is trying to secure what? The public good, the public safety, in that sense, right? So therefore, it is both to assure this and the government's authority. Seek the motives that have brought men, united by their mutual needs in the larger society, to unite more closely by means of civil society. So why do they, try to find out what is the motives that bring men to form civil society, but unite to get in large society, to unite more closely by the means of civil societies, right? You will find none other than that of assuring the goods, lives, and freedoms of each members by the protection of all. So therefore, in other words, that we come together in order to secure each of our rights, and therefore by collectively together, to the goods and lives and freedoms of everyone. Right? Again, this is very Hobbesian, Lockean in that sense, right? follows the logic of why we escape. We form the political entity to secure the goods that we want of our lives, liberty, and our lives, our freedom, and he says what he's very the goods, life, and freedom of each member by the protection of all. But how can men be forced to defend the freedom of one among them without infringing on that of the others? So that's the question here. How can one defend the freedom of one among them without infringing that of the others? And that's one question, right? And the second question he has here, and how can the public needs be met without altering the private property of those who are forced to contribute it? So how can public needs be met without taking or altering the private property of those who are forced to be part of it? Whatever sophisms may be used to disguise all of this, it is certain that someone can constrain my will. I am no longer free, and that I am no longer master of my goods if another can meddle with them. So therefore, all of a sudden, the idea is, if I'm free, I can do what I want. But now, wait a minute, a second, I can't do what I want to do what my goods and how I goods, and people compel me to do things. Then I'm not perfectly free anymore. I'm not free in that sense, right? So he goes that this difficulty, which must have seemed insurmountable, was removed along with the first by the most sublime of all human institutions, or rather by the celestial inspiration that taught men to imitate here on earth the immutable decrees of divinity. Now, this is again 14, note 14. He says the following passage up to the words, and not to be in contradiction with himself, appears in Geneva manuscript, book 1, chapter 4, chapter 7. No, especially the phrase to force them to punish themselves when they did not want, and compare social contract, book 1, chapter 7. Okay, and this is weird. This is the difference in this sense, right? This idea of divinity, again, this idea of that taught men how to do this and achieve the highest things. The sublime intuition, or rather to imitate that higher thing, right? This higher, to imitate here on earth, the immutable decrees of the divinity. By what inconceivable art could the means have been founded to subjugate men in order to make them free? To use the goods, the labors, and even the life of all of its members in the service of the state without forcing and without consulting them, to bind their wills with their own consent, to make their agreement predominate over their refusal, and to force them to punish themselves when they do what they did not want. So how can I do this? This is the very interesting thing. In what conceivable art can you make men are the means that have been found to subjugate them in order to make them free? Okay, one, to use the goods and labors and even their lives in the service of the state without forcing them and without consulting them, to bind their wills with their own consent, and to make agreements to make their agreements predominate over their refusal. And this is the sixth, and to force them to punish themselves when they do what they did not want to do. Right. So there's a six. There's not 5, 6 here. So 6 kind of theme difficulties in that sense, right? How can it be that they obey and how can it be that they obey and no one commands? That they serve, so they obey and no one commands, that they serve and have no master, and are freer, in fact, because they appear as subjugation, and no one loses any of his freedom except that would have harmed the freedom of another. So, okay, this is interesting, right? So, therefore, this is the first 3 things. So, you had 6, and then the 6 get reduced to 3. 3 responses. What is that? In fact, in other words, that how can it be that they obey and no one commands, that they serve and have no masters, and they are all freer, in fact, because under what appears as subjugation, No one loses any freedom except what harms the freedom of another. These marvels are the works of the law. So these three things these three are the works of the laws. It is also law alone that men owe justice and freedom. So law owes justice is the means by which freedom and justice are secured in that sense, right? It is this healthy instrument of the will of all that reestablishes as a right the natural equality among men. So therefore, wait a minute. The natural equality of men is to do what we want, we'll be free to like this, but therefore this leads us to inequality because we don't have the capacities of this. It is therefore the law reestablishes the equality that is inherent in men in that sense. Okay. So therefore reestablishes, notice as a right, the law reestablishes the right, the natural equality of men, the equality of men. It is this celestial voice that tells each citizen the precepts of public reason and teaches him to act accordingly to the maxims of his own judgment and not to be in contradiction with himself. It is also through the law alone that leaders must speak when they command. For as soon as a man claims to subject another to his private will independently of the laws, he immediately leaves the civil state and, in relation to the other man, places himself in the pure state of nature where obedience is never prescribed except by necessity, by force. In that sense, is back in the state of nature by force, necessity, force. So what happens is that, in other words, that he can never do his private act. In other words, the law can compel, but the private person cannot compel another. Because in doing that, he leaves the civil state and going back to the state of nature. The most pressing interest of the leader, as well as his most indispensable duty, is therefore to attend to the observation of the laws, of which he is the minister, and on which all his authority is based. So the leader is what? His duty is to obey the law, to attend to the laws, which he is the minister, and his authority, therefore he's the minister there to do, and his authority is based from them. If he must make others observe them, there is even greater reason for him to observe them himself, as the one who enjoys all their benefits. For his example is so powerful that even if the people would tolerate his emancipation from the yoke of the law, he ought to refrain from taking advantage of such dangerous prerogative, which others would soon attempt to usurp in turn, and often to his detriment. In other words, even the leader has to be careful. The leader, even though people might tolerate him needing to be free from the laws, he should be careful not to be so seen as free, so others will imitate him. So in other words, imitate. Monkey see, monkey do, right? That if the leader is seeing this, people say, "Oh, he's doing it. Why don't we do it?" Okay, the leader needs to be not above the law. He needs to be complete. He needs to show the law is the base of authority. He is the enforcer of the law. So even though in some situations he might have to go beyond what the law requires, he shouldn't put himself above the law in that sense, right? This is what Rousseau is saying here in that sense. At the bottom, since all society's engagements are reciprocal in nature, it is not possible to be above the law without renouncing its advantages. So no one owes anything to any person who claims he owes nothing to anyone. So in other words, at bottom of things, since all society engagements are reciprocal, society, in other words, the idea is social relations are reciprocal in that sense. So therefore, it is not possible to be above the law without renouncing the advantages. And no one owes anything to any person who claims he owes nothing to anyone. For the same reason, no exception to the law can ever be accorded for any reason whatsoever in a regulated government. Okay, so therefore everything's about this is the law. This is where Kant gets. This is when he does this idea. This is the problem is that this is almost kind of like there can be no escape from the law, no escape from the general will. And therefore, this is the idea here that there's, in other words, for the same reason, no exemption in the law will ever be accorded for any reason whatsoever in the realm of regular government. Even the citizen who must deserve something from his homeland should be rewarded with honors and never with privileges. So, in other words, not something extraordinary. In other words, it should be it should be rewarded with honors, not privileges. For the republic is in for the republic is on the brink of ruin as soon as someone can think it a fine thing not to obey the laws. Right? Because again, this is the republic is on the brink as soon as people think it's a fine thing not to obey the laws. But if ever, the nobility or the military service or some other order within the state were to adopt such a maxim, all would be irretrievably lost. So therefore, all of a sudden, that, in other words, that the nobility or the military or other order within the state, so that they were not bound by the law. It's bad enough that that the republic, the brink of law, is lost. Then it will be, in other words, it's on the brink of ruin as soon as someone thinks this. It's irreducibly lost when it's the nobility, which are the what the elites, the leaders in the society, the military, or the other orders within the state adopt that maxim. They're above the law. The powers of law depend even more on their own wisdom than on the severity of their ministers. And the public will derives its greatest influence from the reason that dictated it. So therefore, the powers of the laws are within themselves, the laws of that, than the severities of this. And the public will derives its greatest influence because from the rationale that dictates the law, right? It is because of this that Plato considers it a very important precaution always to place at the head of edicts a well-reasoned preamble which shows their justice and their utility, right? This is, I think, from the laws, right? I think page 15, article, note 15. This is Plato's Laws, book 4, 719e to 724a, on the ineffectiveness of punishments. Compares Social Discourse, Part 2, so Social Contract 2, Book 2, Chapter 5, and the occasional proposal of Emile in Book 2 of Emile. Rousseau's critical remarks in this paragraph can be read, however, as an attack on the legal procedures of the Ancien regime. As an example of what Rousseau may have had in mind, consider the following account of the case, the famous Calas case, which occurred a few years later. Marc Anthony Calas, a member of the devout Huguenot family in Toulouse, was a moody young man who met a violent death, almost certainly by his own hand. The authorities persisted in an attempt to prove that he had been a secret convert to Catholicism, for which they allege he was murdered by his fanatical Calvinist family. As a result, the father, Jean Calas, a man 64 years old, was adjudged guilty on March 1762, was broken on the wheel and then strangled by the public executioner. Researcher now reveals that the outburst of fear and hysteria that led to the tragedy of Calais was really caused by the apprehension in Toulouse lest by the Calvinists take advantage of the 7-Year War in order to make revolt. This is from Wilson's book on Diderot. So therefore, this idea that he gives an example of the particular case in that sense, right? Indeed, the first of the laws is to respect the law. So therefore, the first law is to respect the laws. Severity of punishment is merely a vain expedient thought up by small minds in order to substitute terror for the respect they can obtain. So therefore, this idea of punishment. In other words, it's the small minds who then thinks massive punishments because they think terror should enforce the nature of law. Is this a criticism of Hobbes? Because remember, what is the basis of Hobbes? Why do we form civil society? Out of the fear of violent death. So it is the terror of violent death that has us to flee society into society. This is, again, I think this is echoes what Rousseau will argue against. Rousseau will argue in the second discourse against Hobbes, that it's not man in nature is not a fear. He does fear, but it's not, it's for a different reason. He fears. He does live in fear. He also lives in fear in that sense. All fear. Very interesting that fear is even a Rousseau social contract in the state of nature in that sense. But it's not out of pride, but out of simply just fear, right? This idea. Um, a substitute terror for the respect they can't obtain. It has always been noted that the countries where corporal punishment are the most terrible are those where they are the most frequent. And so the cruelest of penalties is hardly anything except a sign of the multitude of lawbreakers. And when everything is punished with equal severity, the guilty are forced to commit crimes to escape punishment for their mistakes. So therefore, this is, in other words, that he's saying that if massive corporal punishment, everyone does it. Therefore, the guilty does even greater crimes to avoid this, and this is even more interesting. That point. But though the government, although the government is not the master of the law, it is no small thing to be its guarantor and to dispose of 1,000 ways of making it beloved. The talent of reigning consists, in other words, so therefore, what does he says? The government is not the masters of the law, right? And it is no small thing to be the guarantor and dispose of 1,000 ways of making it beloved, in that sense. The talent of reigning consists of nothing else. In other words, making the things beloved. In other words, uh, but although the government is not the master lord, it is no small thing to be its guarantor and to dispose of 1,000 ways of making it the law love. That's the thing of the thing. And this is the talent of reigning consistent. The talent of reigning consists, if nothing else, making the law love. When one has force in hand, there is no art in making everything tremble, and not even very much to winning men's affection and not even very much to winning men's affection. For experience has long taught that the people to be very grateful to its leaders for all the evil they do not do it, and to worship its leaders when not hated by them. So therefore, this is a natural thing in that sense. In other words, if I'm a leader, I have power over you. If I have power over you, the fact that I'm not doing evil to you makes you like me a little bit. Okay. In other words, isn't the negative? It's the absence of my evil in that sense. The absence of knowing that I could do evil to them, since my power I have over them, I could do evil to them. The fact that I don't makes the winning of affection. In other words, there's not very much to win affection in that sense by not doing evil to them, right? And to worship its leaders when they're not hated by them. An imbecile who is obeyed an imbecile who is obeyed can, like anyone else, punish crimes. The true statesman knows how to prevent them. So therefore, punishment is easy. Any imbecile can punish. The true statesman knows how to prevent them. In other words, and it's very interesting. He extends his respectable dominion over wills even more than over actions. So in other words, his power, his dominion is not over actions, people's actions in that sense, but over their wills themselves. If he could create a situation in which everyone did what is right, he himself would have nothing further to do. And the masterpiece of his works would be to be able to remain idle. So if in other words if he could make everyone do what is right, in other words, he can create a situation in which everyone did what was right by shaping their will as such, then he would have to do nothing else because the masterpiece would be able to make idle, wouldn't have to speak anymore, and do anything anymore. It is certain, at least, that the greatest talent of the leader is to disguise their power, to make it less odious, and to manage the state so peacefully that it seems to have no need for managers. In other words, in that sense, this is that weird double sense of this. Therefore, I conclude that just as the legislature's first duty is to make the laws conform to the general will, the first duty of public economy is for the administration to be in conformity with the laws. So therefore, the first duty of the legislature is to make the laws in conformity to the general will. The first rule of public economy is for the administration to be in conformity to the laws. This will even be sufficient for the state not to be badly governed if the legislature had attended as he should to all that is required by location, climate, soil, mores, surroundings, and all the particular relations of the people he was to institute. Right. This is that really. This is that note 16. Compare Social Contract 2, chapters 7 to 9, and Book 3, chapter 8. The word mores, manners, morals, and customs, are translated in French as mores. Right? Again, this is this idea. What is this? In other words, to be sufficient for the state not to be badly governed, the legislature has intended, as you should, to all required by the location, climate, soil, mores, surroundings, and the relationship of people that he was to institute. Not that there do not still remain an infinite number of administrative and economic details left to the wisdom of government. This even more, this infinite after that, but these basics. But it always has two infallible rules for acting correctly on these occasions. So there's two infallible rules. One is the spirit of the law. Spirit of laws, Montesquieu, right? Which should help in deciding cases that laws could not foresee. The spirit of the laws which should help in deciding cases that the laws could not foresee. The other is the general will, source and supplement of all the laws, which will and should always be consulted when they're lacking. So therefore, the idea that the general will, in other words, what should guide this? That there should be the spirit of the laws to decide in cases where the laws do not have not foreseen these situations, and the general will should be consent. This idea that the other is the general will, the source and supplement of all laws, which should always be consulted when the laws are lacking. How, I will be asked, can the general will be known in cases where it is not expressed itself? Must the whole nation be assembled at each unforeseen event? Such an assembly is all the less necessary because it is not sure its decision would be the expression of the general will. Because this mean is impractical for a large people, and because it is rarely necessary for when the government is well intentioned. So therefore, this is first of all, it's not going to happen because it's almost impossible to happen, and two, that if it's not necessary if the government is intentioning well. Here, this is compares Social Contract Book 2, Chapter 3. Okay. For the leaders know well that the general will is always for the side most favorable to the public interest, that is, for the most equitable, so that it is only necessary to be just, and one is assured of following the general will. So therefore, it says, what does justice requires? What is the public good? What is the public benefit? What is the public utility? What is the just in that sense? The just in that sense, in this case. Um, uh, 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 and it is assured following the general will. Often, when it is too openly offended, it manifests itself despite the terrible restraint of the public authority. I look as near at hand as I can for the example to follow in such a case. Right, in China, the prince follows the unwavering maxim of blaming his officers in all disputes that arise between them and the people. So blames the prince, the Chinese emperor, always blames the officials when there's a dispute between them and the people, right? In other words, he says that, despite the terrible restraint of public authorities, I look near at hand as far as I examine the cases follow. In China, that's the what he says. What he goes. In other words, that the prince in China, the prince follows the unwavering maxim of blaming his officers in disputes that arise between them and the people. Is the Bren expenseman run province? The intendant is put in prison. Is there rioting in another? The governor is demoted, and each mandarin answers with his life for all the trouble that occurred in his department. Not that the affair is not examined in a regular, not that the affair is not later examined in a regular trial, but long experience has made it possible and to anticipate the verdict. In other words, it's not that these things will be addressed, but he says long experience, customs of there is rarely any injustice to remedy in this, and the emperor, convinced that public clamor never arises without cause, always discerns among the seditious cries that he punishes some just grievance that he rectifies. So therefore, this is the emperor, not rarely any injustice to remedy in this, in doing it this way, he says. Because the emperor, convinced that the public clamor never arises without cause, always discerns among the seditious cries that he punishes some grievance that he rectifies. It is no small thing to have brought order and peace to all parts of the republic. It is no small thing that a state is tranquil and the laws are respected. So it's, in other words, bring order and peace to all the parts, and it's no small thing that a state is tranquil and the laws are respected. But if one does nothing more, all this will be more apparent than real. All of this will be more apparent than real, and the government will have difficulty making itself obeyed if it limits itself to a mere obedience. In other words, this is going to be more apparent than real in that sense. Therefore, this mere obedience and tranquility, that this is apparent. This is not real. So it cannot limit itself to just merely being obeyed. If it is good to know how to use men as they are, it is better still to make them what one needs them to be. So there's a very important passage on that line. If it's good to know how to use men as they are, it is even better to make them what one needs them to be. The most absolute authority is that which penetrates to the inner man and is exerted no less on his will than on his actions. So therefore, get to his will, make his, in other words, getting not only to his actions in that sense, but in penetrating his will and changing or getting his will to do what you want him to do, want them to do, what they need them to be, right? It is certain that people are, in the long run, what the government makes them. So in the long run, people are made what the government makes them in that sense. Warriors, citizens, men when it so pleases, mobs, rabbles when it wishes. So therefore, again, they can make them. The government can make them warriors, citizens, and men when they want it. But then what happens is a mob and the rabble what it wants them as well, right? Or through its and every prince who scorns his subjects dishonors himself by showing that he did not know how to make them worthy. So in other words, if the prince is attacking his subjects, it's because he did not know how to make them. He's criticizing himself because he didn't know how to get the people to be worthy in that sense. Train men, therefore, if you want to command men. So very interesting. This is very looking at Sparta, very Spartan. I said, train men. Therefore, education. Education is you train men and focus on their wills. Train their wills, not their bodies. The idea of their actions. Our actions are tied to our bodies, and our wills are tied to our souls, right? So that, the willing agency. Therefore, their character, and that stuff. So therefore, this idea you form their wills, you educate their wills. If you want to command, train men. Therefore, if you want to command them, if you want the laws to be obeyed, make them beloved, so that for men to do what they should, they need only think they ought to do it. So in other words, make the laws beloved, so that men should do what they should. They need only to think they ought to do it. They ought to. They ought to love it. They love it. They're beloved. They want something that they want. They want it. So therefore, if they want it, they should do it in that sense, right? That was the great art of the government of the antiquity. In those remote times when philosophers gave laws to people and only used their authority to make them happy and wise. So therefore, this idea, the philosophers gave the laws to people this is again like Kyrgyz and Solon, right? Gave laws to the people and used their authority as wise to make them, the people, wise and happy. From this came the many sumptuary laws, many regulations concerning wars, The many public maxims accepted and rejected with the greatest care. In other words, this is the sumptuary with customs and law, the laws that regulate customs, mores, habits, and the many public maxims accepted or rejected with the care. Even tyrants did not forget this important part of administration, and they gave as much careful attention to corrupting the mores of their slaves as did the magistrates to correcting the mores of their fellow citizens. In other words, remember, the tyrant is ruling them people despotically. Therefore, he's the master. He's their master, and therefore, the people are their slaves. So he needs to corrupt them. He corrupts their mores. He is, in other words, the magistrate who wants to correct the mores. The tyrant seeks to corrupt the mores in that sense. But our governments think they have done all there is to do when they have collected money. Don't even imagine that it is necessary or possible to go that far. So therefore, in other words, he's saying that the modern governments, modern times, we've only, in other words, once we've collected money, they've done all they can do when they've collected the tax, got the money, got the wealth, got them to deliver the money, got them to do something, and they don't even think that it's either necessary or possible to to go that far. In other words, to make them want to love things. This is the modern world. His critique of the modern bourgeois world, where it's more important economics, utility, getting utility is more important than getting people to want the right things, to do the right things, to educate their souls and educate them, right? So let's stop here. You have any comments or questions? Please put them below. You can say, "Hey, I didn't understand this," or what is going on. They're very interesting, or you didn't like something. Highlight something and ask. Maybe you need something more explained. Okay, please put it below. If you liked it, like it. Hit the like button. Share it with a friend. Share it on your social media. If you've not subscribed, subscribe, and let's grow the channel a little bit. Next thing we can do is that if you didn't like it, you can always hit the down button. Okay, please. No, you're free. But say why in the comments. What's wrong? What I do wrong? What's something that you didn't like? And maybe, again, we can learn. People can learn. Maybe I did something wrong in that sense. Maybe I repeated something wrong. You thought you might think there's another way to understand it. Then say it in the thing, and others can discover it too. No. Another thing, you can follow if you want to follow me on social media. You can follow the links below. If you want to see see my academic side and as my academic to check my research and stuff like that, you can see my academic social media below that. And if you want to help me to do what I do, because the world sucks now because of inflation, and I used to my salary back then was they haven't increased our salary. They've increased it a little bit, but not higher as inflation. So therefore, it's hard to buy books. It's getting hard. I can't, and I'm getting older, and I can't do I used to teach more at different places, and I should teach at another place. I need another job. I need another job. Oh God. Okay, that means I have less time to do these things. This is time consuming also. I should do writing also, which is this past couple weeks I haven't been doing. So bad me. I'm kind of need a break. I need to break a little bit. Yeah, I'm hoping to do this. So you can help me by becoming a Subscribe Star member, because I could use the money to do something with it. Okay, so Subscribe Star or Patreon, right? There are two means. Of course, you say, but there's you're doing it for free. Why should we do it? I wish there was I'm not monetized, so you can't just give me money by donate, gift like that. I wish there was a link to something like, hey, here's the the hat, and say, please, charity, please, the bucket. And I'm like the musician in the street saying la 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 la. Okay, that's another way you can do it is by buying one of my books. The 3 books that I published are linked below. The third one, the Lulu book, is I self-published it because it's more of this is not really a book in a normal sense. It's more of a kind of study guide on the whole politics. But the other 2 are academic books, and I'm working on the third one, third academic book. And people have been bitching about this, and I maybe should, get off my ass and do so. But you can buy one of the books. You can do it through Amazon or any of the major online books dealers, or you can go to your local bookstore. Maybe they'll order for you. That's it. Again, we're going to be looking at part two next time. Next video, again, Mondays and Wednesdays, we do this Rousseau thing. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're continuing Schmidt, and this is at the time dictatorship. I mean, there are people saying, people 10 years from now saying, what do you mean this? He has done a Schmidt thing at the same time? So this is live action versus the live action sequence of a time versus the future. When there's somebody going to come back here about 6 months from now and say, searching the internet and say, oh, yeah, Rousseau, oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, you see it. Okay, that's why I put it here forever, so that this will be my lasting memory of what I do. Um, a video presentation of what I do as a teacher. That's it. And on Wednesday, Saturday, I mean Fridays, usually I do a live stream or something like that. So that's it. Take care. Bye bye, and see you later. Have a good day.